In 2008, my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a terminal illness that is horrible, and he was given 6 months to live. It's strange when you're given a finality of death that it can bring certain things to the fore. And for me as his daughter, I wanted to make sure that Dad died with enough peace that would make his passing as smooth as possible. So I made a decision to seek out one of his political heroes, and that was Tony Benn. And Tony agreed for me to interview him as a gift to my father. And we talked about all sorts, including truth within the political scene and in the wider scene. And I've waited 12 years to upload those videos, and in the context of what is going on right now and the craziness of the world, I think his wisdom really is relevant, and I'd like to share them with you. Thank you.
Mukherjee, Vibhuti, Vasant, Mukherjee. Okay. You're running?
You're running.
Well, my name is Tony Benn, and your daughter Lena came to see me some time ago, and then she wrote and said you weren't very well, and asked me whether I'd send a message to you. Vibhuti Bhusan Mukherjee, my name is Tony Benn. And she tells me that you're ill and that this is a problem and you just started treatment. And I don't know what I can say that's very helpful, because I'm a bit older than you and I'm still alive. But my wife had cancer some years ago, and I was very much struck by some of the things she said to me. She said, I'm not battling with my cancer. I'm living quite happily with it. And that was a very moving thing to say. And she said, I say to my cancer cells, don't eat me up too quickly because you'll have nothing left. And she said, for me, death is a great adventure. And I found that very positive, because after all, we're all going to die. I'm ahead of you in the queue, if you know what I mean. And I look back on my life and think of the things that I've heard that have helped me. My mother used to say, death is God's last and greatest gift to the living. And what she meant was, and I think anyone who's ever seen anyone die knows that that is true, that at the moment when somebody slips away, they're at peace and you're at peace, your mind is peaceful too. But of course I must also add this, in case you think this is an obituary, that medicine is an astonishing development. And this idea of have cancer as a death sentence is completely untrue. And my wife was diagnosed years and years before, and she went on all the various therapies, radiotherapy and so on, and she managed. So I'm not, I think it was wrong for me to make this a goodbye message, but a message of hope. Now, my grandmother was an old Scots lady when I was very young, and I was about 8, and I was by her bed, and she was very ill, and I thought she was going to die, and she said something to me I've never forgotten. She said, the great thing about your last journey is you don't have to pack. And I thought that was such a wonderful thing to say. My house is an absolute mess, as your daughter will tell you when she comes back with this film. And my children will have to bin it or sort it or do whatever it is. So there's a great sense of relief. And of course, as you get older, you're younger than me, but as you get older, you see life in a different way. I'm much more interested now in my father and grandfather, and I didn't know one of my grandfathers, but I'm interested in them, first of all, because at their age, as I am now, I see the world in the same way they did at the end of their lives, and therefore their experience makes more sense to me, but also because every generation has to fight the same problems. I mean, we live in a time of very rapid technical change. I was working it out myself. When my great-grandfather was born, no railway train had ever run. When my grandfather was born, no phones had ever been built. When my mother was born, no plane had ever left the surface of the earth. When I was born, there was no television. When my children were born, there was no internet. But the moral questions remain unchanged. And so that is the thing that's helped me in life. And so therefore, when I look back on history, and I'm sure you do the same, I'm not terribly interested in kings, presidents, prime ministers, dictators, emperors. They all come and go. The people you remember are the teachers. And when I look back on my life, Moses and Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and Galileo and Darwin and Freud and Marx, they taught us something. And whereas a political leader shines a torch and says, follow the path I show, a leader, a thinker, a teacher, explodes a pyrotechnic into the sky, and all of a sudden you can see where you've come from, where you are, what the alternative routes ahead are. So you remember teachers, and you also remember movements, because all progressive change, and there has been a lot of it, have been made by movements for colonial liberation, the rights of trade unions, the right of women to have votes, the environment, the end of the apartheid, have been movements. So teachers and movements are what interest me, but leaders who parade on the stage and say, vote for me and I'll solve your problems, don't help me at all. And therefore I see Marx as a teacher. I think of Marx as a man who explained the world. I never studied him when I was very young, and when I got older I felt a little angry to just realise that every conclusion I'd come to, he'd come to much more clearly about 100 years or more before. And all he said, if you really look at the world, the conflicts are not between men and women or between people of different colour or race. It is an economic conflict, if you like, between those who create the world's wealth, 95% of the world's population, and those who own the world's wealth, 5% of the world's population. And funny enough, though I've become more of a socialist as I got older, I'm not trying to make anyone else a socialist, because I think socialism has helped me and it might help them, but if somebody comes to me with a problem, I'm not going to lecture them on my ideology. I'm going to try and listen to them and find out what their problem is, and then try to help them, and then say to myself, why has that problem affected this person? Is there something we could do to see that problem didn't recur? And of course out of that came some wonderful things. Out of that came the National Health Service in Britain. It's got many problems, but when my wife died, if we had gone private, which I wouldn't have dreamed of doing, it would cost hundreds of thousands, millions, I dare say, for all the treatment she had over such a long time. And that was a product of two concepts. One, the idea we're all men and women and brothers and sisters, and the other concept was that we have a moral responsibility to one another, and the health of everyone is the concern of everyone, and the health service was the product of that. So these are the things that have interested me in my life, and I look back on my life with enormous happiness, because I had a supportive parents, as Lena has had. I've now got 4 children and 10 grandchildren, and another generation coming along. All my grandchildren have got, many of them have got boyfriends. One's in love with a Punjabi lawyer, another's in love with a black American doctor, another was in love with an Iranian journalist, and it won't be long, and there'll be masses of them coming along. And of course, in that sense, immortality is what you leave behind. It's not the body that's immortal, but the spirit, the memory. You can't ever fill a gap when somebody goes, but you can decorate the gap with flowers. And my father said something to me which I have also never forgotten. He said, every life is like a pebble dropped into a pool. and the ripples go backwards and forwards forever. And nobody's going to tell me that Moses and Jesus and Mohammed and Buddha aren't still alive, because they are. I mean, they're ideas, and the physical form is of very secondary importance. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Lena gave me some questions about myself, but it's not so much me that's, indeed not at all me, it's just as we get to a certain age we have to reach some preliminary conclusions, and these are the conclusions I've reached. I know you're going through a very bad period, as I know will happen to me. I don't know when, but it won't be very long, at 83, and how we approach that, recognising the limitations, but also recognising the liberation. You see, the thing about the hospice movement you should know about, the hospice movement treats the patient and not the disease. And I think that's a very interesting idea. It isn't about dying, it's about living to the full until you die. And I think all these things were helpful to my wife as she progressed towards her death, and made her life happy and made our lives happy, even though we knew her life was coming to an end. And so there's a happy memory. And after all, happiness is not all that easy to find in the world, but if you can find it in how you see and do things yourself, that will be a comfort to you. So you and your family, Lena and others, will give you comfort, and your life, and as you lead it, will give them comfort, and that will pass on from generation to generation. And you can't ask much more of life than that. Anyway, good luck, and I hope all goes well with you, and I'm sure it will. And if you're thinking of immortality, I'm sitting with the immortality you're thinking about, and she's sitting next to me, and she put this television camera in front of my face to talk.